somebody had asked which one should they use.
Right.
What I got questions now was a little bit more. Can Bob kind of explain what UV is and explain what ozone is?
Sure.
So can you explain? Obviously somebody that doesn't know what UV is and kind of explain that.
Yeah, sure. Let's start with UV because they're both easy to understand, but one is a light and one is a gas. To put it into two words. And
okay.
So one is a light, and it's a special wavelength light. And literally, it looks like a fluorescent bulb or one of those bulbs from the 80s or somewhere where you go there and they turn the lights out and everybody's white part looks kind of fluorescent or whatever. It's literally a UV light like that, only it's a special wavelength and it's a lot more intense. But as things travel within, say, an inch or two of that bulb, if they're a living organism, the UV light is strong enough that it alters the RNA. DNA, RNA is ribonucleic acid, and it alters the RNA of organisms and make it so they can't reproduce. So it doesn't kill them on the spot, but because they only have a very short life anyway, they die off rather quickly that way because they're only going to live for a few minutes anyway, so they can't reproduce. So this bulb is, in most cases, it's a long bulb about 3 feet long, or maybe it's a U-shaped bulb, but in any case, it's long enough so that there's enough residence time for organisms to pass in front of the bulb and be exposed to that radiation long enough to alter their DNA or their RNA. And only things that are going within 2 inches of that bulb are getting killed. So the cool thing is that it doesn't add anything to the water, but the non-cool thing is that only the stuff going through the chamber is killed. So if you got algae growing in the pool and it's connected to the walls of the pool or the ladder or something, it's not going through the UV chamber. So that's one thing. Sometimes also, if the bulb doesn't have the right wavelength, it alters or mutates some of the bacteria or algae. It only partially destroys them, and then the organism's still alive, so it mutates. And so I'm not talking about, the creature from the Black Lagoon, but on a molecular level, at the bacterial level, it can slightly mutate. So it can create some mutated organisms that may or may not be harder to get rid of. But the important thing is the intensity of the bulb, the residence time in front of that bulb, and whether or not the sleeve or tube that is around the bulb is optically clear. And this is really important because the bulb is inside of a tube or a sleeve, and that sleeve is made out of optically clear quartz glass. And there's, in higher end units, there's a wiper that you push back and forth manually, and it wipes off that bulb. Because if you get oil and soap and scale and stuff on that tube, now you've got the wrong wavelength of light. And the wrong wavelength doesn't kill anything. So you need 254 nanometers of UV light to kill things. And so if you get very far away from that, you don't kill anything. So all you got's a light in a box then. So it's real important that that bulb stay clean. They do, the energy is strong enough to destroy chloramines, so it can reduce chloramines, but also understand that when you put a UV system in, UV destroys chlorine. And so even though you have cyanuric acid in the water, some of your chlorine is going to be destroyed by that high intensity UV light. So you need to understand that some of your chlorine is going to be wasted on the UV energy. The other important things are about it. With both of those units, they only put out a fixed amount of UV light or ozone, which we haven't talked about, but they only put out a fixed amount. And so if you have an event in the pool that is an unusual event, you may not have enough energy to kill things. You know, what happens if 10 people jump in the pool? And UV can only do so well, and the water is only passing through that tube at 50 gallons a minute. How long does it take the whole pool to go through it? So most of these devices cannot be used as a standalone, or they can be used as a primary sanitizer, but not standalone. So they can't exist by themselves. You have to have some kind of a backup. And most of the time, the easy way to understand the backup is we talk in killing things. The important thing is to prevent bather-to-bather disease transmission. And those words are important, bather-to-bather disease transmission. And if there's nothing in the water that kills my bacteria before it gets to you, then we can have transfer of disease from me to you. Mm-hmm. And in the case of UV, there isn't anything. So it's not supplying a residual to the water. It's only actively killing things that are passing through the chamber. In the case of ozone, which we didn't discuss yet, but we will now, ozone is a gas. And what they do is our air is about 18 to 20% oxygen. The rest is mostly nitrogen. And so the oxygen that's in our air, if we apply enough energy to it, we can split an oxygen molecule into 2 oxygen atoms. And because these atoms are unstable, they quickly combine with a nearby oxygen molecule and create 3 atoms of oxygen together, which is called ozone. And these 3 molecules of oxygen together are deadly. They are between 25 times and 2,000 times more effective than the most active form of chlorine. So they are killer. But the problem is they last for about 3 minutes. And even under good conditions, they last about 18 minutes. So again, you turn an ozonator off, and 3 to 18 minutes later, you got no protection in the pool. So there's 0 in the water to prevent bather-to-bather transmission. And that is important. So we're going to need a backup of chlorine with these. Even if it's a low residual, at least it's a residual to prevent that bather-to-bather transmission. And that's really important. Ozone is great for a lot of reasons. It's a super oxidizer, so it will oxidize more things than chlorine does. It will kill more things than chlorine does, and it will do it faster and better. Many pools that have ozone, there's no more ring around the tub, none of that scum and oil buildup that gets on the tile. There's none of that. It goes away. It kills things faster than chlorine does. Chlorine actually has to diffuse through the cell wall of an organism and then disrupt the metabolism. With ozone, it is so strong, it runs up to the organism and just rips it open. And so it is much more deadly than chlorine is. So it's a great thing. It kills a lot of stuff, and they are trying to sell units that can stand alone. And these are very high-end ozone generator pools. And these are systems where the ozone system and the UV maybe that they use with it they can cost $35,000 or $40,000 just for the
Wow.
disinfection system. And then you've got, what, a $200,000 pool, so they're not for everybody.
Yes,
But,
yes.
So you can't just buy a $1,500 ozonator and throw it on the pool and forget about chlorine. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
So ozone, I do like ozone. I like it a lot. And it is a good thing for as either a primary or a supplement to whatever you're already doing. And so it is a good thing. And you can eliminate upwards of 95% of the chlorine if you get a big enough ozonator. And but we have to remember that we can't go ozone alone, because I just don't think that I think the problem is too big, that people can get in the water with bacteria that we're not used to each other's bacteria, and then it can spread, whether they're illness or not. Just E. coli and things like that can cause problems. So, so I think it is important to have that backup or residual that's in the water. But they are good things. There's two kinds of UV. There is low pressure UV, and low pressure UV makes UV in only one narrow range of ultraviolet, 1 nanometer range. And that nanometer range, all of the light coming out of that bulb is in that range. And that range is good for killing organisms. But it may not be good at getting rid of chloramine. So we need to decide whether we need that kind of a unit or we need a medium pressure lamp. And the medium pressure lamp, I don't want to get this wrong, the medium pressure lamp, right, okay, the low pressure lamp kills organisms, and the medium pressure lamp has a broader range of wavelength, and so it kills stuff, and it destroys chloramines and all those kinds of things. It kind of does all of it. So you have to decide if you just want to kill organisms or you want to get rid of chloramine, and you decide which one of those will work better for you. And then you need to size it so that we get enough intensity to kill it, to kill organisms. And cryptosporidium, that you may have heard about, takes 22 millijoules per centimeter squared of energy to kill cryptosporidium. And so if you're thinking about buying a unit, you need to make sure that the water is in there long enough to provide that 22 millijoules per centimeter squared based on flow. So, and this is all covered, by the way, in the books that are with our course. It's all laid out very carefully for you. And it tells you all about that, so you can decide which unit you may want to buy.
Okay. I have one quick question here. So somebody asked, and I don't kind of quite understand that. It says, it's a question, and ozone makes it from injection point to vessel before gone?
Well, the ozone, let's think about, first of all, what needs to be oxidized or killed in the water.
Okay.
So the more stuff that's in the water, the faster the ozone is going to be used. So if we inject ozone into the water, if there's a lot of organics in the water, then the ozone is going to get used up very quickly. And if there's not, then the ozone is not going to be used up very quickly. And so some of the ozone can actually make it into the pool. But in a lot of cases, the ozone is made, and from where it's injected to where the water enters the pool at the return line, most of the ozone is gone. In fact, almost all of it's gone in most cases. So we don't have it gassing off. And in an indoor installation, they do have to put in an ozone destruct unit so that there's no ozone that actually reaches the pool, so that people can't breathe it. But in an outdoor installation, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, great.
Of course, UV only works inside the chamber, but ozone, with these big units that I said, like they're putting on these really expensive pools, high-end pools, ozone is actually making it to the pool, and they're getting a residual of ozone in the pool now. But the ozone, again, if you turn it off, somewhere between 3 and 15 minutes later, there's none.
None in the pool.
So it's very strong, but it doesn't last.
Okay. So my next question is, here they ask, how do you plumb the ozone into the system?
The ozone system, the ozone is injected with an injector. And the most famous of these injectors, what a lot of companies use, is called a Maisie or Mozzie injector. And he got the patent on it many years ago. And ozone is a gas. And in order for it to work in water, we have to dissolve that gas in the water. So it doesn't stay as a gas in the water, it dissolves in the water. So we have to get it dissolved. And that transfer of it being a gas into being dissolved in the water is called mass transfer. And the Maisie unit, their unit will actually will transfer 95% of the ozone dissolved into the water. So it's doing something. Think of it this way. If we made ozone and made it in 2 big bubbles and released it in the bottom of the pool, and it came up through the water and blew out into the atmosphere, how much did we kill? Okay, not much, right? So what if we made 1 billion little tiny microscopic bubbles and injected them into the water? What happens then? All of them get used. So that's the point. Ozone generators make micro bubbles or even nano bubbles, and under pressure, and get that ozone dissolved into the water so that it can do some good. So
Gotcha.
That's an important thing too. Years ago, some of the spa companies started injecting ozone into the volute of the pump and let the impeller mix it up. And that was probably the worst thing they could do. Just about none of the ozone was getting into the water.
Right.
So anyway, so it is important how you inject it. And of course, the concentration needs to be up there. There are two methods of making ozone. One is with a UV light at a nanometer wavelength of 185 nanometers. You make ozone from oxygen. And the other way is with a dielectric, which is kind of like a spark plug, only think of it as a tube, where you have a tube that's metal inside of another tube that's metal, so that there's a gap between the 2 tubes, and then apply an electric field to that, and you create a spark, but it's a continuous spark. And a continuous spark is called a corona. And so it's called a corona discharge ozonator, and it makes about 100 times or 1,000 times more ozone than a UV light will. So they make a lot more ozone than a UV lamp will, but they're more expensive. So.
Gotcha. Now, there's one thing that you talked about that I think was key in the podcast, and that was obviously having, these are great systems. They work. You can use them definitely with the pools and residential and commercial and stuff like that. But really, there's the residual issue of chlorine to protect the bather.
Right. And this is important because if, as we've said already, if there's ozone in the water, you have a UV system, and 10 people or 15 people jump in the pool, how long is the ozone going to last? And then how long is it going to be before it recovers? What's the recovery time? So you can be hours before it recovers. So, and during that time, there's zero protection. So it's really important to provide that residual. And people say, well, we want to get a low residual. And my answer is, well, I'm not so sure that a low residual is much better either, because if you try to keep a half a part per million in the pool, what happens if 15 people jump in that are all sweaty and half of them take a leak? I'm sorry, urinate. What happens? What happens to the chlorine level? It all becomes chloramine in a very short time. So, I would say if you're going to add ozone, add as much money's worth of ozone as you can buy. Provide a residual about 1 part per million, or maybe 1.5 parts per million, and you'll just use a whole lot less chlorine to provide that. Mm-hmm. So you won't consume very much chlorine to maintain that residual, because ozone's doing the bulk of the work. So, right. And the other thing is, many homeowners say that they don't want to be exposed to a lot of chlorine. And I mention this a lot because it's something that people don't know and don't think about. And if you put in 2 parts per million of chlorine into your swimming pool with no cyanuric acid, the bathers are exposed to 2 parts per million of free chlorine, period. If you have 30 parts per million or more of cyanuric acid in the water, 97% of that chlorine is bound to cyanuric acid. So only 3% of the chlorine is available to kill things, but it also means only 3% of the chlorine is the part that the bathers are exposed to. So what's 3% of 2 parts per million? And the answer is 0.06 parts per million. And it's almost no chlorine that they're exposed to when cyanuric acid is in the water. So having cyanuric acid in the water exposes bathers to less chlorine than using none.
Gotcha. So here was a follow-up question from one of the guys, and that was, so nowadays they have units that are combined, so they'll have a UV and an ozone. Right. So if they're going to try to sell one of these units to a customer, or try to introduce a customer into one of these, would it make more sense to try to just sell them on a system that's combined, that has the UV and the ozone?
Right. Well, here's the thing. In the last 3 years or 4 years, there's a new type of system coming out that's called AOP, and that stands for Advanced Oxidation Process. And it's a process where you use hydrogen peroxide, ozone, and UV in any combination to make what are called free radicals. And free radicals are produced when ozone degrades from being ozone back to being oxygen. So it's 3 atoms of oxygen, and when it degrades back to being oxygen, that singlet of oxygen combines with hydrogen and makes what's called a radical. And I told you how strong ozone is. Well, radicals are like the nuclear bombs of disinfection in swimming pools. The radicals are 10,000 times more powerful than ozone. Okay, they are just super killers. The fact of the matter is, however, that they last 1 millisecond. And a millisecond is 1,000th of a second.
A second.
Okay, so they don't last very long, and obviously you can't measure it.
Right.
You have to do it too quick. So you can't measure it, and all we can do is kind of take the manufacturer's word for it that it's working. But the fact of the matter is that there is a way, when you make ozone, there is a way that you can customize the ozone production to actually produce some other oxygen species. In addition to ozone, you can make what are called peroxygen compounds. And one of those peroxygen compounds is hydrogen peroxide. So in the process of making ozone, you can make some hydrogen peroxide. And if you make ozone with a UV lamp, you've obviously got UV there also. So you've got UV, hydrogen peroxide, and ozone. So companies are making these units together that may have an ozone generator and a UV unit all in one unit. And when you put it in water and run it through there, it makes hydrogen peroxide, ozone, and UV. And the UV and the hydrogen peroxide enhance the production of free radicals. And so these free radicals are just killer at everything, but they only last a super short time. So there are units that you can buy from Dell and Hayward and many other companies, Clearwater and some of those companies. They're all making units now that they call AOP or free radicals. The problem with them is that, as I said, you can't measure how much they're putting out, and so you have to trust the manufacturer to make sure that he has sold you a unit that's for the right size of your pool. And salesmen being salesmen, they keep saying, well, mine's bigger than yours kind of thing. And so a unit that may be designed for a 15,000 gallon pool, somebody says, well, you could put it on a 25,000 gallon pool. And so they escalate it to the point where, it ends up pissing off homeowners because it doesn't work when you get the wrong size.
Right.
But there's no way for you to verify that it's working except for an idiot light that's on the side of it that lights up and says it's on. Well, that to me only means that light's on. It doesn't mean it's making anything. But, ozone had that same problem 25 years ago. And they figured out that there is a way to check for ozone, and they started incorporating that. So eventually there'll be a way. The way that they test for AOP in drinking water is a one-pass system. So the water's only going through there once. So they can measure an organism before, run it through the AOP, and measure the organism after to see how much it got rid of. So, that way it works. But in a recirculating system, who knows? So anyway, there will eventually be a way that we can size these and know what we're getting and stuff like that. Right now, we kind of have to believe the manufacturer that it's a good thing. And you may have seen some ads for some of these products. They're clear. I was going to say clear. It's clear something. I forget the name of it though. But it's a thing that floats around in the pool, and it's Clear Comfort, I think is the name of it. Clear Comfort, and Dell has an AOP unit and so on. So you will maybe see some of these units or hear about them as we go forward. But that's the skinny on it.
As a time change, yeah. And so those for the UV and the ozone, those bulbs and stuff, those are basically based on number of hours run. I'm assuming that they would, you just kind of every whatever 5,000, 10,000 hours, and then you have to replace
most of them,
those.
I think are 7 to 11,000 hours on the UV bulb, and the ozone generator. They're now making them what they call ceramic dielectric, and because they're ceramic and dielectric, they have a really long life, and so you're looking at perhaps 5 years, 7 years before you need to replace the dielectric. So,
Oh, wow.
So they have a long time, and there's not really any cleaning or anything involved. There's only just once in a while measuring, making sure that you got the right water flow to get the pressure on that injector, because that pressure works on a specific PSI. And so you adjust the flow rate going through that injector to make sure that it's got the right pressure. And it needs flow to get that pressure. So you adjust the flow through the injector to get the right pressure to dissolve it all.
To dissolve all those.
Yeah, many companies that make ozone now are starting to use different methods again about how much ozone you need. And in round numbers, if you've got a pool that's up to about 15, perhaps 18,000 gallons, you'll need a 5 gram per hour ozonator to be a primary disinfectant. It still won't eliminate all the chlorine, but maybe 90 or 95% of the chlorine. If your pool's bigger than that, you probably need a 10 gram per hour unit. And, you could get a 9 or a 7 or whatever, but, those are just some round numbers for how much you need.
How much ozone?
How much ozone you need.
Great. I hope that answers those questions, guys. I know that we've been seeing some of these, new units out there. We talked about kind of getting some, videos and stuff like that. I know Hayward came out with a smaller unit with both of them. So we were kind of talking about it on one of our podcasts. So I'll have to reach out to them and kind of try to see who in the area has some of those that I could go out and check out and play with.
So. Pretty much you either plumb them in the line or you put them in the pool.
Yeah.
And I think the Clear Comfort, the last time I looked at that, the Clear Comfort was something like retails for about $3 grand.
Okay.
And so it's not for everybody,
Yeah.
And I don't know what the dealer or service tech cost is, but
right.
I think their retail was like $27.95 or something like that. So you may get questions from your homeowner saying, well, I'm going to spend $3,000 on this thing and I can't test it to make sure it's working. And it's like, trust me, it's like,
yeah.
So I just I don't know. I think, and I guess the only way around it might be with a 100%, guarantee. If you don't like it, we'll give your money back or something. But, there's got to be some way that the homeowner can be assured that it's doing something. I'm sure that you can put it in there and show that it's reducing the chlorine level or something. But I don't know that.
And I think
there isn't a direct test.
Yeah, and I think most of the pool guys, I mean, if we have those in there and we have those, I know Dylan installed one on his parents' house, and that was obviously the goal to reduce, the consumption. And it was the same thing. It was a concern that, how do we know that or not? And then obviously it's Dylan, it's his parents' pool, so he maintains it. So he saw the drop in, the chlorine consumption. But that's what the pool guys would have to do from pool to pool that has those units, obviously be able to either have an app to track it or track it manually so that you see that chlorine consumption. That's probably, the only thing that's going to be able to tell them, yeah, this unit, is working.
Sure. And, don't forget too that all of the things that you do with the water, all the water conditions and water balance still need to be maintained. They don't reduce that.
Correct. Yeah, it's still going to be in there. So now, how long has ozone been for the residential side of pools?
Well, I was VP of Technology of Dell Industries in 1990. And Dell, I think, started in 1978. So the ozone's been around for a very long time. Ozone's been used in drinking water for 100 years. So, in fact, most of Los Angeles County's water is ozonated. They ozonate it to kill everything in it, and then they put a chlorine residual in it so that when you get it, there's some disinfectant in it.
Disinfectant.
They ozonate the crap out of it, literally, and then put some chlorine in it and send it to you.
Now, let me ask you this, and this is a little bit unrelated. So how much chlorine is in drinking water coming out of these facilities?
It's between 0.5% and 0.5 ppm and 1.5 ppm. But many water treating facilities now are starting to use chloramines for disinfection because the chlorine stays around longer. Free chlorine doesn't stay around very long. So if you mix it with ammonia, it still is a disinfectant. It's not as good, but it still is a disinfectant, and it stays there longer. So there's still some chlorine when you turn it on in the distribution system. The water may sit in a week in a pipe.
Yeah.
And with free chlorine, it might not have any chlorine in it. So with chloramine, there's still some chlorine in it.
They're still covered.
But you also need to be aware that you may have pools being filled up with chloramines in them. You have makeup water with chloramines in them. And if you're replacing very much water, you're going to have to get rid of those chloramines.
Mm-hmm.
So you should be testing for free and total chlorine every time so that you make sure that you don't have a lot of combined chlorine in your pools. Because if you do, it's easier to get rid of chloramines when they're small.
Yes.
When they're big, they're a pain in the neck.
So, Bob, I have, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more questions, believe it or not.
Okay.
Here's our problem. We've been talking for 54 minutes already.
Okay.
So I have a lot of these questions, and I don't want to jump into any of these questions because they are questions that will kind of take us in a different direction. And they're great questions. They're questions about startups and stuff like that, and some types of chlorine and which ones affect more the alkalinity and that kind of stuff. So I really don't want to jump in. And what I'd rather do is save them for either our next podcast or our next Instagram Live so that the guys can kind of get that continued information.